I will go directly to this. Where are we today? The image that I was giving you is still the image of traditional functioning of power. We have what in psychoanalysis we call symbolic castration. That is to say, let's say we have an ordinary miserable individual. But you know, the moment he puts on the insignia of power, it's no longer just him. It's power, law, authority, divine authority itself, which speaks through him. This is the traditional logic of power. Why? In Lacanian theory, we call this castration. Because you are decentered. You know, here we can see where some old-fashioned feminists get it wrong. When Lacan talks about so-called phallic signifier, he doesn't mean any symbol of male virility. For Lacan, phallic signifier is the signifier of castration. To assume phallus means to assume your castration. In what sense? The phallic element for Lacan is the insignia of power. A judge puts on a robe, a king has a crown, whatever, and this is the phallic element. And you see the joke that the phallic element is detached from you. That's why Lacan talks about castration. The authority never comes from you, yourself. It's always external. There is always a gap between your miserable reality and your symbolic identity. But I claim, if you allow me the concluding line here, I claim that this gap between the symbolic title and the miserable reality of an individual functions today in a different way. More and more, it's like this. I quote here Alain Badiou, who wrote this apropos Jean Genet's wonderful play Balcon. Quote from Badiou: "We encounter here an imaginary feature of democracy. Democracy means precisely that there are no costumes. Inequality no longer wears a costume or a dress. There are dramatic, gigantic inequalities, but their laicization leaves them without a costume." End of quote. On a simple descriptive level, this means that in a democratic egalitarian society, masters, those who exert power over others, no longer have to wear insignia or costumes. They can dress and act naturally, like everybody else, renouncing all dignity. Today's master's message is precisely, see, we are all common people like you, with all weaknesses, fears, limitations, and so on and so on. So today's master is fully ready to admit its castration, in the sense of, I am a weak guy and so blah, blah, blah. But the trick is that this admission of castration, like don't take me too seriously, I'm a weak guy like you, not only in no way undermines his or her power, but it's even the condition of the power. It's the very means, instrument of how power is exercised. And now, this brings me to I'm really cutting it short, to my concluding moment, which is a wonderful tautological mechanism of how, today, it's no longer subversive to claim our leader pretends to be a dignified person, but really he is an ordinary guy like us. No, he openly admits that he is an ordinary guy like us, but he nonetheless continues to function as a master. Which is why, and with this I wanted to conclude, but I will rather cut it short, what fascinated me is how today ideology reproduces itself precisely by way of admitting its own weakness. For example, let me go to WikiLeaks or Snowden revelations and so on. What was the basic reaction of those in power? It wasn't to deny anything. It's difficult to deny. It was more something like, okay, we all know this, that governments are doing secret things and so on, but what's the big deal? We didn't learn anything new and so on. You see the point. They are ready to admit everything. They just want to curtail the symbolic consequences. It's the same strategy as, you know, if you are accused of something, of doing really something horrible, you must know that the most efficient way to avoid sincere apology is to apologize. But in this slightly aggressive way, you know, like, I did something horrible to you. What I would have, the way to apologize, okay, I'm sorry, now fuck off, leave me alone. You know what I mean? This logic of admitting it, that the very all too hasty admission neutralizes it. And I think this is maybe, again, one of the great ideological mechanisms today. This is why, unfortunately, I don't believe in the power of disclosure as such. And I'm a friend with Julian Assange. I love him, but I always warn him. Don't think that WikiLeaks really taught people something they didn't know. Of course, we learn many details, and it's good that we do. But let's be frank, didn't we all suspect it? So what's the point? The point is that we cannot any longer pretend that we don't know it. The true target of WikiLeaks leaks revelation are not those in power, but we. We are not, we, ordinary people, we should change. Because I claim, this is a risky hypothesis, if we were to ask many ordinary people, what do you think about torture? Torturing prisoners and so on. I claim that the majority of people, their answer would have been something like this. Maybe it has to be done, but let's do it discreetly, don't bother. You know, like, they should do it, you know, and the point is to break this. The great, again, achievement of WikiLeaks is not what we learned, but that it became public knowledge. We cannot any longer pretend that it's just a private secret. We all know it's happening, and so on and so on. This is why I claim, again, we need critique of ideology. That is to say, denunciation as such is not enough. And this is why, with this I will conclude. For example, I don't agree, he attacked me once briefly in a footnote in New York Times, Alan Dershowitz, the lawyer who proposed, you know, legalizing torture. In the sense of precise conditions, you have doctors who examine you, that's how much pain you can endure without risking your health, blah, blah, blah. And my point is, here I'm referring to the event book, the one chapter before the last, where I talk about dis-eventalization, in the sense that an event, in the sense of new civilizatory achievement, is cancelled. We regress. Look, I'm not a hypocrite here. When friends tell me, but if you are desperate, wouldn't you torture someone? I'm not a hypocrite here. In a little bit of melodramatic, stupid way, if you ask me frankly. Yes, I can imagine situations where, honestly, the least I can say is, I cannot promise you not to succumb to the temptation of torturing. Let's take this ridiculous melodramatic situation. Some evil guys kidnapped my young daughter, which I don't have. And then I have in my power a guy, I know that he knows where my daughter is kept. Well, out of pure despair, I cannot guarantee that I would not torture him. But I think it should remain prohibited. You know why? I should at least remain aware that out of pure despair, I did something terrifying. The ethical catastrophe is when this is normalized, legalized. That's the end, in a way. And here, I think, we really live today in an the public admission of torture is just one of the effects of this. We live in an era of ethical regression. We even don't notice how things which were unthinkable 20, 30 years ago are now a matter of public debate, and so on and so on. So it's not true that things are simply, how should I put it, getting better and so on, gradual progress. No, we live in an era of ethico-political regress, in an era where ideology is stronger than it ever was.